Good morning, Jamie.
Yay, good morning.
A day later, thank you for bearing with me and being so flexible as always, and so much to talk about again this week. But I guess there's so many themes for both of us, as we sort of just chatted before we went on air, thinking around when we think about being neurodiversity affirming, how can we truly be neurodiversity affirming if we're not including those who we're referring to, those autistic, those neurodivergent perspectives, the voices of those who we support, um, and listening. So how can we do that?
Well, I think we have to first establish the baseline population.
Mm,
What is the sample that we are drawing from?
yeah.
And, I don't want to get all academic and, trust me, I'm a doctor. But, from that standpoint, who is in this population that has
Mm,
training this data set that says this is affirming and this is not affirming, right?
mm,
And if you're on social media, for example, you can see different populations, right? And
mm,
so you have different autistic experiences almost talking over each other sometimes,
mm,
and I see this, as a Scottish person who's visibly Scottish, white, right, working in an urban setting in Los Angeles, that is 97% of the population of the district. I think that's the right number, but they're not white. They're not Anglo. They're
mm,
you know their experience of autism is different than mine. Have we included them?
mm,
Right? What about African Americans?
mm.
You know, or Afro-Caribbean or whatever? Have we included them? And what you find on social media is people saying, no, that's not representative of me. And even in the diagnostic criteria to begin with, as I've written a bunch of times and ranted about endlessly, you have a child who is given a diagnosis early or eligibility for services early, and they present typically under the DSM, and then they have a friend, and then they start chatting to the friend. And then in the next re-evaluation, no, of course you're not autistic because you chat to your friend,
Mm,
right? And so for those, especially here in the Americas, who are socialized female, they're socialized to be kind of passive, agreeable, chatty,
mm,
typical girls, if you will. And because of that, they don't meet the criteria.
no,
Right? And so are they autistic? Do we believe them when they say they are, even though they can access diagnosis, right? Are they
mm,
included in this framework or the development of a framework? And you can find them on Substack and Instagram and whatnot. And their answer is no. I'm not, I don't see myself in that.
yeah. And I guess it's if we're being neurodiversity affirming and not, that is inclusive. That includes every angle, every intersection, and it feels like a lot of our um, requirements for evidence-based practice is still setting the bar at randomized controlled trials. Well, how does that have more leverage over your experience, your perspective? Um, I just it's so it just doesn't feel right.
Well, I think the evidence, and again, I've been writing about this,
Yeah.
nobody pays attention to it, but you know, the DSM, take it for what it is. As problematic as things become with the DSM, take it for what it is.
Mm,
It, for the most part, for autism, it describes a language architecture, right? Do you have these social pragmatic communication problems? Well, yes, Gestalt processors have these problems because we're in a situation where we lack the scripts,
mm,
right? And so if we don't have anything in our script garden for that particular query,
Mm.
then we have a problem with social communication and interaction.
Yeah.
If we use ecolalia a lot, when we have our safe words, when we have our safe phrases and stuff that soothe us and comfort us, well, then, according to criterion B, we have repetitive patterns of behavior,
Mm.
right? So if you are to look for the evidence base, you don't need random control trials. You have the data already. It's there. It's in my diagnosis. It's in every autistic person's diagnosis, especially if they were diagnosed under DSM-5, because that was more rigorous than 4. With
Mm.
4, you had the difference between what they would call classic autism, which is almost like non-speaking autism, and Asperger's disorder, which was like, the autistic criminal mastermind part of autism. And because I had scripts and I was a bit older, I was classified under Asperger's, right? And then all of the sensory stuff had their own diagnoses at the time. And then fast forward to DSM-5, all that gets folded into autism, and I'm all of a sudden, because of my Gestalt nature, I am level 2 support needs, which is appropriate for me, right? And I think, at my age and everything, and reflecting, and it's the end of the school year, and people assume that, because I can explain my thoughts now, I must
Yeah.
have always had access to them. And that's not true. It's absolutely untrue. And so if you were to measure like what Gestalt processing is by me now at this age, without having known me at age 12, it's not fair to make these things. Like we all grow up. The better supported we are, the better we might be able to do. But in terms of the bottom line to your question is the evidence is already there. It's in the DSM. It's
Yeah.
in every single one of our assessments.
Yeah. And then let's think about assessments and what they truly assess, because that is something that you've also written about extensively, and um, thinking about, well, who decides what criteria we're assessing? Is it set up? Does it show our GLPs, our autistic people's true cognitive style, true language ability? I I think not.
No, no,
Because they're not measuring, um, they're not including those groups when they're devising these assessments. Um, they're not set up for the style of learning, the style of language acquisition that our neurodivergent children, young people are following. So let's move on to that bit.
well, I think that is the nutshell of the paper that I have in right now for
Mm,
review, to go kind of beyond category error and look at the instruments themselves, the validity of instruments themselves.
mm,
And one of the things that you have to do to get a PhD is study a population, apply something, and see how they react and record all the data, and then defend your conclusions to a room full of very smart people. And when you're choosing an assessment instrument, you have to validate it.
mm,
Does this not only return accurate results, but is it fit for purpose?
mm,
Does it do the thing it says it does?
mm.
And when you look at the different tools for language, does it do the thing it says it does? The answer largely is no.
No.
They're they're essentially using an off-label script to use a pharmacology kind of thing. Like, hey, we think this might work here, and we seem to like it, so we're going to do it. Yeah, you might grow an arm out of the side of your head, but at least this primary symptom's gone. That's not valid. That's not how validity works. And when I was working in Texas around this original kind of validity question, I would explain it to men in Texas of like, because of my arthritis and injuries from sport and stuff, and I'm trained and licensed with firearms, I can reliably shoot on a draw, in a crisis situation. I can reliably hit 7 ring low left. And I know exactly why I do this. So I'm reliable. I'm just not accurate, right? Because you want it in the center, and that's how you walk away kind of safely. And that's how I explained it to Texas, about
Mm,
the difference between reliability, validity, and accuracy.
mm,
And so, yes, I'm reliably, low left 7 ring, regardless of the platform I'm using, or the caliber of cartridge I'm firing or whatever. But I'm not accurate. And a lot of our assessments are the same way. And
mm,
there's a gigantic argument that's happening on Instagram right now between a provider who the community believes is teaching people to game the system and teaching them how to manipulate the results on one of the assessments that's used in determining, an autism diagnosis. And there's a gigantic fight about that. But the bottom line is all of these assessments are subjective.
mm,
And if you look at the evolution of the DSM, the reason for the text revision was that the APA seemingly believed that psychologists were being too lenient, right? When you have like 1 from criterion A and 2 from criterion B, a lot of extra people slide through that they didn't believe should be there. People like me
mm,
who can now talk.
mm,
So the text revision says you must satisfy everything, at which
mm,
point I'm no longer autistic because I can talk and I can chat to my friend.
mm,
Um, and they want to go a step further with DSM-6, where there has to be a biological marker. But there is none for autism. So then does autism disappear?
mm.
Is there no such thing as autism anymore? Right? Which is kind of the premise of no place for autism. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I think it's really similar with, say, assessments that we're requested to carry out for as a speech and language therapist now for children and young people to demonstrate their language abilities. Um, and I have to say, moving, trying to move away from it, but it's like this catch-22 situation where you have to show deficit and standardized scores in order for that child or the young person to receive support. But what if they have a real disability, but they actually score really well on some of the language assessments, because that isn't the bit, sitting there in a quiet environment which you've made comfortable for them from a sensory perspective. They're allowed to stand, they can stand up, they can move around during the assessment, they can, the bright light isn't on, and so there's no background noise. And so in terms of how they function in, a testing situation like that, may give a result that indicates no, there's no deficit, there's no disability here, when actually that student has quite significant needs that require support, strategies, understanding. And similarly, you might have another student that or young person or small child that you're doing these, supposed to be trying to do these assessments with, and they might actually show a completely different picture and not show how competent, how able they are, how they're, what actually are they even sometimes I think, what are they actually describing? What is this actually telling me about this child or this young person in front of me? Doesn't tell me how they go go about day-to-day life. It doesn't tell me how they are able to self-advocate, doesn't tell me how they're able to make their needs known, how they're able to share emotion, how they're able to self-advocate, how they're able to have their sensory needs met, all of those things. It doesn't say anything about that. Now, I put that obviously in those are my observations, but again, it is, some of your writing this week has really made me think, well, I'm at the outside in. I'm that outsider. And I'm thinking, but that in my sort of like when I'm sort of assessing a child or a young person, that's really what I'm thinking about is, sort of functioning, their well-being, their all of those other things that I've mentioned, and not a standard score, because these assessments weren't designed for them. Sorry, I've gone off on
Right.
one.
No, I think, if I was to summarize what I heard you say,
Hmm.
how do we, in validating an instrument, how do we separate the problems of the ecology of the room
Mm,
from the ecology of the mind,
mm,
right? How do we control for the ecology of the room?
mm,
And I mean, I think about my own classroom,
mm.
and I have students who are on my caseload that come to my classroom to study and to receive instruction when the ecology of their own classroom for English or maths or whatever is very hostile for them. And so
Yeah.
they will ask their teacher, can I go to Dr. H? And the teacher say, fine, okay, fine. So what is it about the classroom ecology in my classroom that's different than the classroom ecology of my colleagues?
Yeah.
Um, you know, in terms of, my own practice, validating my own methods, publishing that stuff in my books, and this is what I do, this is how I work, wrapping things in story, and the importance of story. Having colleagues come to me and say, Dr. H, I'm at the limit I don't understand how to teach the transformation of functions or the unit circle or logarithms. Can you come? And I would come and I would tell a story. And I would wrap the formulas and charts and whatnot in story and history. And then the kiddos will retain it, right? Because
Mm,
I'm speaking to the ecology of their minds, right? I can't go into my colleague's classroom and rearrange the room so I'm comfortable, right? And change the ecology of the room, but I can speak to their minds, And I see things, in your profession about executive function and, how essentially we're trying to train children to factory time and they're resisting it. And so
mm,
here's some wonderful tools that you can have to, get Kronos back in their lives. And, but what if you are like me, very Kairos oriented? It takes as long as it takes. The
mm,
ripening of my language skills took 35 years because I was in the wrong ecology, right? Where is all of this in the data?
mm,
Where is this in neuro affirming practice? At what age does your practice stop practicing, right? Will you see a 35-year-old? I
mhm,
don't know, right? But what program do you have for someone like me, right? And in terms of ecology, when I had a sports scholarship to school and I got injured and I lost that, and I was kind of left to my own devices, illiterate, and I had very few professional gestalts. So I did the few things that I could do. But if you were to look at me in my early 20s as a ghillie, as a bodyguard, I
mm,
was very competent. I was very successful because not only did I not have to say anything, I was discouraged from saying anything. I didn't have to read, I didn't have to write anything. I just had to deal with problems and be big. And that's it, right? And so does that negate my autism diagnosis or whatever? These are to me, and I think the majority of autistic people, Gestalt processors, silly questions,
mm.
right? Very silly questions. And there is no real benefit for someone my age to say, I'm autistic, right? There's no benefit.
No.
There's no social program, there's no welfare. So why would I lie about it? Why would anybody lie about it?
Yeah.
The internal architecture, you know, why would we talk about burnout and spoon deficit and all these things? We're not getting anything from it, right? There's no check coming or anything
No.
like that. If anything, it's often used against us in employment and stuff. Here in America, a big scandal. If you check the I'm disabled box, you almost will never get hired. on an employment application, if you say, I need accommodations, forget about it. You're not even getting an interview. And so the big scandal is if you didn't check the box and then you later claim disability, they deny it because you lied, right?
Wow.
So there's all of these things happening. And when you think about practice being neurodivergent, neurodiversity affirming,
Mm,
how are you defining the whole of it?
mm,
What does that mean?
yeah, I agree. And I think I mean, it's one of those questions that I ask myself every single day. And I think it's not, it's not something that you get a badge for or whatever. Oh, I'm, Cathy Schilling, I'm neurodiversity affirming. I'm learning to be neurodiversity affirming. And definitely, oh my goodness, since I've been having chats with you, Jamie, I've learned a huge amount. And it's those bits that you think, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't, particularly when you thinking about like the Kairos and Kronos and time and how that, how children and young people, adults are just expected to fit in with the Kronos when actually that's not how they're made up.
Right.
But our
No, I think
society, our schools, they are.
I think the best example I can give, again,
Mm,
reverting to story, I am a credentialed teacher, right?
mm,
I'm a special educator, and I'm autistic, and I'm a Gestalt processor.
mm,
And my school district is affirming according to its own marketing across a wide variety of things.
mm,
My own neurodivergent identity, they're affirming of this. They say this publicly. My own queer identity, they're affirming of this. All of these kinds of things. They're very affirming in publicity. So I was invited to take professional development this summer, and I asked, and this is within special education, right? This is to
mm,
do an extra little bit, not necessarily required, but it's free, it's a day, it's whatever, for my credentialing, and it might make things easier for me down the road, whatever. But
mm,
I reached out to the program coordinator and I introduced myself as autistic and as a Gestalt processor and having significant need for support in language.
mm,
And may I have all of the materials in advance so that I can prepare scripts, so that I can engage in this
mm,
professional learning activity where the kind of summative assessments are going to be language based. I'm going to have to
mm.
write things. I'm going to have to participate in groups and all of this kind of stuff. May I please have the materials in advance? And the answer was no. That's it. No, we don't share those. So how can you be a neurodiversity affirming district,
Yeah.
the second largest district in the country, if you can imagine that one of your autistic students might become a peer, might become a
Mm,
teacher, might still need those supports, right? How can you be affirming?
yeah. And I mean, that's it, isn't it? Sometimes I might go into a school and say we've suggested using I don't know, some kind of visual symbol system to support that child with understanding and supporting them with transitions. And then, you know, suddenly they're doing well with transitions and everything's going really, really well. And you go back into the school and that support is gone, and they say, well, they don't need it anymore because they don't have any problems with this. No, they still have needs, but and they still need that strategy. But the reason why we're not seeing those needs in perhaps the same observed behaviors as we did before is because they've got strategies and supports and accommodations that really help them. So please don't take them away. They need to stay.
Right.
And this
But
happens, yeah.
you're doing so well, so we can't stop now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, it's so many things, I guess. So, what is neurodiversity affirming for you? God, there's a big question.
My goodness. I
Mm,
think I think it begins with understanding.
yeah.
understanding the population that you claim to affirm. I
Mm,
think that's the beginning of it. Understanding how we experience life
mm,
on the various places. I had delivered professional development in my classroom to some of my peers a few weeks ago about classroom ecology.
mm,
And I shared with two of my colleagues, like, I have had a meltdown in your room. Like, I was made through the credentialing process to go visit classrooms. My advisor told me which classrooms to visit. I went to your rooms,
mhm,
and that resulted in meltdown. These things that they are telling you are best practices for middle school, the vibrancy, the joyousness, the all the words everywhere, the colors everywhere, get up, move around, chat. That was completely overwhelming for me.
mhm,
I had to leave. I had to keep it together through the end of the day, through my own class. I had to make it home safely. And then I was absolute rubbish. Not only for the end of
mm,
the day, but for the following day. I took a day off each time. And I'm explaining this to my colleagues about classroom ecology. Do we plan as teachers? Do we have this wonderful vision of ourselves as teachers, as providers, if you will, that here's I want my room. I want the pictures of me. I want all my favorite posters on the wall. I want all of these kinds of things. And I want to nest. It's the word I use. I want to create this nest. Well, where is the customer? Where's the student in that equation? Right? And so when I think about the ecology of the room, yes, of course, I think about my own sensory needs and stuff. But I also look at the roster. Who's coming? What does their IEP say? Right? What do I
mhm,
know about them? What do they like? And so I create an ecology that is supportive.
mhm,
And sometimes there are things that I will temporarily exclude or permanently exclude. A few years ago, there was a student that had very strong sense of smell and things were very off-putting to her.
mm,
She didn't like my tea, right? So okay, this year I will not make tea, and I have tea somewhere else. Things like that. But I think a majority of people, it's like, well, if you don't like it, leave.
mhm.
Is that affirming?
Or you have to get used to it because
Yeah.
this is what it's going to be like in the real world.
Right.
That's another
Yes.
phrase.
And that is industrial time. You have to turn things in on time. You have to turn in projects on time. Kronos, the bill must come, and be paid. And yes, and so even in grading structures in my class, it
Mm,
sometimes takes a student longer to get something. So an equity structure of grading says the goal is for you to learn this thing.
mhm.
If you learn it on day one, great, we move on. If you
Yeah,
learn it on day 45, you've learned it.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
happy for you. And I'm not going to punish you because Kronos said it was due 2 months ago. I'm
yeah,
going to celebrate you for learning it.
yeah. And I guess that's where education systems, national curriculums, the national curriculum that we have, the syllabus for GCSEs or A levels, it doesn't. It is all Kronos. It doesn't allow for students to learn it in a way that maybe is meaningful to them, or in a style that's meaningful in a way that means they learn it, that they understand it either. And that's not just thinking about the autistic population that we support, but a whole range of students and young people with speech, language, and communication needs. It goes across the whole board.
And I think some of the problems that I've read about with the GCSEs and the how long it takes now,
Mm,
something like 20 hours, 25 hours, or whatever it takes to sit through all the exams. The pressure to not just settle for O levels, but to go for
mm,
your A levels. Um, and then the ecology of those spaces, right, is very similar to what my students face here, um, with our various tests and whatnot. And because of my credential, I proctor the kind of small supportive setting for those tests. And I can walk around and I can look over their shoulder and see what the questions are asking. And one of my masters is in instructional design, and I know how to design assessments, right? And I keep thinking to myself, a lot of these questions, they're not assessing the thing that they want to assess,
Mm.
right? It's not pure mathematics. It
No.
is, can you interpret badly written questions and sift through the attractive wrong answers? And can you sort out what the right answer is, even though it's not 100% accurate? That's the brief.
Yeah.
And then you get punished. In one particular test where they take in year 11, the maths and the English scores are transmitted to colleges. And then there's no entrance exam for colleges anymore, but these are where their placements will be. So if you're absolutely rubbish on the maths test, you will not be placed at the 101 level in college. You'll be several levels below, which is time and money.
Yeah.
And the
Exactly.
questions are garbage, absolutely garbage. And so when I know that a student is struggling, and obviously I can't help them in the moment because of the rules and stuff, but
Mm.
I'll ask them afterwards. I'll ask them the same question, but just in a more relational way, a more affirming way, if you will.
Yeah.
And they get the answer correct most of the time. Kids are quite bright, but I think a lot of these assessments are sorting mechanisms.
Yeah. They are. I don't know how we can change systems, Jamie, but I think even just talking about it, having these conversations feels like there's a community of people that think about these things, that care about these things for the the children, young people, adults that we support. It doesn't just end in it doesn't begin with a 3-year-old that comes to see me and that's it. Once they get to 18, this is a evolving um, need, an evolving requirement for an ecology that suits and supports them wherever they are in life.
Yes.
So
And here you age out of services at 22. But what happens if you're not ready?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, off you go. That's it. All the best to you. But and so every year I seem to find one student on my caseload that I worry about that. You know, we have these
Mhm.
wonderful occupational programs and occupational therapies and rehabilitation services and stuff. And on your 22nd birthday, goodbye.
Yeah.
You might not be ready. Oh, sorry about that, mate.
So before we finish, I feel like we're sort of going down a line at the moment that feels quite I don't know, I maybe I need a little bit of joy to finish on, Jamie. So um what would be a moment of joy to finish on today?
Well, not to be too commercial about it, but 3 books,
Oh, there we go.
right?
Yeah.
So all of the stuff that I've been talking about and being
Mhm.
miserable about, I wrote the book on how to do it
Yeah.
better. The whole of it as accommodation. I've been releasing it on Substack, one
Yeah.
chapter at a time, completely free. Maybe I have a publisher, maybe I don't. Maybe I self-publish. We'll see what happens there.
Mhm.
But sometime midsummer, the physical book will come out so that parents can walk into schools and say, "Look, here, here's the book. Let me smack you over the head with it." Behind that will be the field guide, released much in the same way as, a free chapter a day. And then, along with the hard copy.
Yeah.
And so those are two kind of parallel tracks. And then the maths book that I've been working on now for a couple of years. And I've been plagiarizing myself in my colleagues' classrooms where I teach my own lessons and stuff. But the story of maths, and I had a video this morning on Substack about kind of the project of the story of maths and why for Gestalt processors especially the removal of story from instruction has been so tragic. So 3x plus 9 minus 10 plus, it's like, what is all this about?
Mhm.
Tell me a story about a navigator, tell me a story about the building of the pyramids, and then I can teach you Pythagoras and stuff like that. And so that is kind of a GLP affirming math book that takes you from year 4 to year 12, right? From
Wow.
basic arithmetic all the way through calculus. And I find when I'm supporting students in calculus that when I tell them story about what they're dealing with in these crazy formulas, they
Mm.
get it because they're smart. They've just been locked out by language. So those are three books that hopefully by the end of the year they'll all be in book form and in people's hands and stuff. So I think that's the happy part. I'm not just a
No.
curmudgeon sitting here complaining about, these whippersnappers and how they've ruined the world. You know, I've written 10 books in my life already, and they're all essentially me seeing a pattern and trying to leave it a little better than I found it. And I think these next three are along that same line.
Mm. Well, we shall definitely look forward to reading them. Where does the first book start? Where can people access who are perhaps new to your Substack or new to the Ort side? Where do
Well,
they?
the you can in the archive, right? You
Hmm.
can click on the archive and you can search for any word you want. And sometimes you'll search for something like DSM and you'll find 500 things. And that's because I've written 500 things, right? But the book itself, if you want the very beginning thing, you would look for the whole of it as accommodation. And the
Right.
prologue has all of the links to all of the different chapters, right? One chapter a day. So it looks like one article, but the article is the chapter.
Okay.
And that's how the so you think differently, the field guide will be written as well. But if anybody is on my Substacks and they want to find, alexithymia, they want to find GLP, they want to find stuff, just go to the archive and search. And
Brilliant.
it's all free. It's all absolutely free.
Well, Jamie, it's been another lovely conversation. Thank you so much, and great to finish on such a positive note. And I know people are really excited about all of your um, upcoming publications. So until next week, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank the squirrel for staying hidden.
See you soon. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.